Hi, welcome to the Canadian City and Southern Railroad. Today's video is going to be a little more about soft shell scenery, cookie cuttering, and stair stepping. Also, ties. Lots and lots of ties. One nice thing about having the framework for section 5 done is now I can work out from section 1 either direction. From section 1 to section 5, and from section 1 on to section 2. Now, a technique I'm going to use here is stair stepping. Now, I'm doing this tiny bit to save weight, but mostly to save material. When I cut this angle in here, I only cut 2 layers. But by breaking those layers up and stepping them up one at a time, I'm able to get, instead of just an inch or two up, all the way up to the top. Now I have to be careful when I put each layer in not to press down too much in the back, otherwise the whole thing will sag down. And then you'll have too big of gaps on the bottom here. So I'm shoving inwards, but being careful not to push too hard downwards. I think I had those out of order. Yeah, that's better. Well, now that I get these layered up with some adhesive on them, I've got a slight gap here, so I'm going to have to cut a special piece there. Now that I've cut this little funny shaped piece to fit right in here so that there's no gaps, I can put the last 2 pieces on, and all they are is the ends of the first 2 pieces that I cut for the very bottom. Now when the adhesive's good and dry, in 12 hours or so, I'll be able to finish carving this area. Section 5 easily rolls out of the way. Over here on section 2, I'm going to use a combination of stair stepping, like I've done in this area over here, and cookie cuttering. Now, what do I mean by cookie cuttering? Well, on this area over in here, I've cut a hole because there's no need for all this foam in here, and that saves that piece of foam. Now, it just so happens that the piece that came out over here was a very close fit for this piece here. So just a little bit of trimming and marking to get the curves of the track, and then I cookie cuttered out that piece. This piece is just a scrap from one of the angles that was over on section 5. And I will glue it down here. Covers up that hole and gives some slight variation in the elevation of the scenery. This piece in here will get cookie cuttered later on. Right now the adhesive's not firm enough and I don't want to take a knife to it or it'll push through. Now that this has been cookie cuttered out, I will stair step up layer by layer with little thin pieces until I get up towards the top. And again, very little material for a fair amount of fairly rugged area in square footage. Now down in here, there's an opening in here and it needed to follow the contour, the shape of the curve in the track here. So the way I do that is I put a piece there, take a pencil and reach underneath and trace along the edge of the benchwork. Then I simply cut that out and possibly with a little bit of sanding get a piece that's going to fit right in there. Well, the foam adhesive is all dry, and this is the first third of section 2, ready to be carved. You can see that I've removed my engine house so that it doesn't get in the way of the tools, because I'll be attacking this pretty aggressively here in a few minutes. As we move along, we're staying horizontal here to match the part that's already been done. But as we move along, the angle of the strata and the tilt of the strata is increasing to indicate that we're moving farther up into the hills. Note the angle and also the stair stepping, which saves material and gives a nice profile using less stuff. My first step of carving is to blend in the profile between section 1 and 2. I'm using a very coarse wood rasp for this. It's fast. If I do a little bit of scratching on section 1, that's fine. I'll touch it all up when I blend the two modules together in the plastering and painting and texturing stages. I'll do a lot more with the rasp, but this is just to get the two sections blended. The next tool I'm going to use is this saw. I'm going to use it because it's fast. I'm going to use it similar to the way I used the rasp in the last scenery videos I did. But I'm going to use it because, like I say, it should go faster. We'll see. First of all, I'm going to add some vertical cuts. That's enough of that for now. Well, I found that I can't get the saw close enough to the cliff face because it's too close to the wall. So I have to come back with my rasp and knock off these square edges. Well, the basic rasping and carving is done, and it's time for the final carving step. Now, usually I use an X-Acto knife like for this, like I did in one of my previous videos. But I thought, what if I could speed that up 5 times? Doesn't take too long with an X-Acto, but still 5 times faster is 5 times faster. So I made this little tool, which is now down to 4 times faster because one of the wires is already broken off. So I need to try the same idea with stronger wire. But the idea is similar to the little tool I use at once the plaster's on to do the final striation texture. But I thought I'd do it in the foam ahead of time. Something I've kind of neglected in some of my previous modeling, or I've done it different ways, is talus. Now, if you use real rocks or commercially purchased talus, it doesn't always match the texture of the styrofoam. Also, it weighs a lot. So when you carve the hills and rocks with the rasp and with the tools and whatever, you get tons of it, buckets of it. You have to vacuum it up. But what about getting some of it to stick so that it actually looks like the real talus, the rocks that fall down the cliff sides and land at the bottom of the hill? So I came up with this idea, and I think it's going to work. We'll see. As I do the final steps to clear off the excess styrofoam that's sticking, I've put a little tiny bit of white glue and got it just barely wet at the bottom of the hill where the talus would collect. And I've noticed this in videos of railroads that aren't far from my location, although my location, the one little railroad that was there, is long gone. But from not too far away, I've noticed in the video the presence of a fair amount of talus. So I'm knocking down some little bits and I'm letting them collect at the bottom, and I will let the glue dry before I put on the plaster paint coat. I say plaster paint because I will show in the next portion of the video that it actually is plaster paint. There's plaster and paint, but it's mixed really, really thin. The foam's all carved now, and I've taped off my track. And when I was at the final stages, I came with my little finger and I came along with the edge of the ties to help make sure that the tape is sealed good. I'll try to keep the brush off of it, but if I don't want it getting on my ties. It can be cleaned off easy enough, but why bother if you can avoid it? So this is just kind of a recap from my previous texturing video. And this is a soup of plaster and paint, joint compound, and regular paint. It's kind of a raw sienna color, and it actually is the same paint that's painted my fascia board. I don't like the fascia board to be a contrasting color with the rest of the scenery, because I find when you get little bits of it in a picture or whatever, or a video, it's not as glaring as if it was a dark color or say a dark green or something like that. Now this is a very soupy mix. There's probably more paint and water than actual plaster. And it goes on quite quickly. And I'm not worried if I get a little bit over onto section 1. And I'm painting everything. I'm even painting the sides of the foam where it's exposed, even though right in here, like, that'll actually be cribbing on the edge of the pond here that I'm doing now. Try to get underneath the rails here without getting paint up on them. Now the white and the plaster will make this dry quite a bit lighter than the paint on the fascia board, which is good because that's the base color of my rock. And I want it to have color all the way through, so if it gets scuffed and chipped over the years, I'm not ending up with white splotches in my scenery. hold a piece of foam up. Behind my layout I have a 1/2 inch gap. And at some point I may put some low relief scenery back there or some sky drops, backdrops. But this allows me to get right up to the edge, still work quickly. Now with my plaster and paint mess, some parts are thicker paint and some parts are thicker plaster because it's not mixed 100% evenly. And that's a good thing because here on the rock faces, I want it to be a little more plaster than paint. It's stiffer and it'll dry a little lighter and it'll make it easier to do the final texture, and it'll hold that detail a little better. And like in my previous texturing soft shell scenery video, you'll notice that I'm stabbing a lot. That gets it in all the crevices. And make sure that I don't have any pink rocks showing through. I'm doing along the top here first. So I can get the styrofoam out of the way before my arm gets tired. Now I can keep coming down the hill. And I'm working back to front. So that up by the fascia board, where I'm leaning over, gets done last, and I'm not leaning over into the wet plaster paint and making a mess. I've got a little wet water here, and I'm very lightly spray that down. I don't want to get it too wet because I don't want it to go through to the floor or onto my boxes, on my shelves. But this will help it run down into the ditch. And get into some of these larger crevices. It will also help it shrink a little bit as it dries, and that'll get it into some of the detail a little nicer. And I don't want to knock the talus that I showed in the earlier portion of the video loose. Alright, due to the windowsill, my styrofoam is staying in place all by itself, so I don't have to hold it. That's nice. Still continuing on here, stabbing and brushing. Well, the plaster paint is finally dried enough that I can come in with the final texturing stage on the rock work with the fine strata tool. Now it's become nighttime while I've been waiting for this to dry just enough, so there's going to be a bit of a shadow here. This is the transition from section 1 to section 5, which is temporarily locked in place. You can see that the foam has all been cut and glued and stair-stepped into place. The adhesive is dry and it's now ready for carving. The right side of the gorge is started, but it's not yet complete. The profile for the Vermaho River and between the two sections has been cut, and that's now ready for styrofoam. As you can see, the morning sun is streaming in quite brightly, so I may have to shoot this little bit over again if the contrast is too extreme. Over here on section 5, all of the adhesive is dry and the foam is ready to start cutting and carving. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to follow the profile with a little jeweler's saw. Keyhole saw or the rasp would work for this also, but that makes a lot more mess. Here on section 5, I finished up the styrofoam layers on the west side of the little canyon. I haven't started to carve it yet. I've left the edges square to better illustrate the idea of stair-stepping the scenery pieces. All of this is hollow underneath. It doesn't go all the way down to the base of the framework. It's lighter and it saves lots of material. And now it's ready for carving. Over here on section 4, there's a big change. All of the ties are in for the whole section. Thousands of them. Wonderful ties from Kapler Lumber Company. The other end of section 4, which has turned out to be the largest section on the layout. All the ties are in down here as well. There's a tiny little bit of flex track that will be in the tunnels, but everywhere that's going to show will be hand laid track. Back here on this back siding, the ties are a bit different. They're actually sticks from my yard that I've sanded on the bottom and sanded on the top to represent rough cut ties back here on this siding, which will be used a lot less than other portions of the layout, representing areas where the railroad didn't want to spend for fully treated ties. This is similar to what I did on the cattle line on section 1 and on the logging line on section 3. This is how I make my rough, untreated, hand-hewn ties. I have here some sticks from the backyard. Various types of bushes that have long, skinny little growths on them. And I'm going to take one and using some very coarse sanding block, this is 36 grit, I'm going to rough off one side. I'm going to lay it down to where it wants to lay naturally. And I'm very quickly going to flatten that side. Now, when I first started doing this, I simply cut them to length and glued them down to the cork road bed. You have to come back and sand them level after that, and I find that you knock them off that break the glue, tear up the cork. So you have to be very gentle on that, and it still has a tendency to knock a few loose. So then I decided that I would sand the one side flat first. Then I thought, why not sand both sides flat? Now this side, see, is automatically finding that flat edge. So now I'm knocking off this edge. I might sand a little more on the thicker end of the stick. Now the sticks are chosen to be close to the size of the wonderful commercial ties that are available in HON3. So that's that part. Now, I'm going to take my trusty old ancient track spacing jig, which on the back side has some marks and some places where I stain ties. And over here I've got a mark, it's pretty chewed up now. It's about 6 feet 6 inches long. So somewhere just shy of that, I'm going to chop these off. I've tried chopping several at a time, and it's just too awkward. This is actually faster. I'm not being too accurate about it as long as they're close to the right length. They're rustic ties, untreated ties anyway. If they don't cut easy, sometimes I'll just rotate them and cut them from both sides. They've been chopped from both sides by the axes that cut the ends anyway. I use these ties only on my least used, least important sidings. But in the 1880s, certain railroads, like the Silverton Railroad north of Silverton, the entire railroad was built with ties like this. Probably from the local spruce forest. You can see the marks in the old books where they were cut to length with an axe and then just run twice through a saw to get them flat. So that's how I did the ties that I was showing on the back siding on section 4. Well, thanks for watching. Next time, we'll wash some rocks and do some grass work and some weeds and bushes, and I'll talk about tufts. We'll see you then.